Silver wings fluttered under the moonlight, however, it was not to fly. It was to shoot out magic bullets made out of silver feathers which leaked out murderous intent from the silver wings. The magic bullets of silver held terrifying power along with the ability to continuously fire at will. The darkness was torn up in the sky 8,000 meters above ground, and a great number of flashes of light pours onto its target. What stood up against it was a steel weapon which sparked out bright red light. Every time the monster who crushed all his foes released a roar, the silver feathers that came flying in would scatter tragically and disperse. Although they were well-calculated trajectory shots, it's meaningless if they all get knocked down in one blow. A hole was created in the barrage which could be mistaken as a wall. What was needed was the courage to progress. That was how the perfect evasion was carried out. Tilda. An out-of-place lovely voice resounded from the situation which gambled their lives. It was Hatanaka Aiko-sensei who couldn't endure any longer and released an improper voice. Hajime used Metsurai his machine gun to shoot down the large barrage of silver feathers that God's apostle Nointo shot. Aiko was being held by his right arm and he continued to dodge at the very last second. She experienced her first dogfight in her life, flesh and blood version. Sensei. Keep your mouth closed. You'll bleed like crazy if you bite yourself. Even if you tell me the AA? I bit myself. Hajime's advice was in vain. Aiko immediately had tears in her eyes. Actually no, she already had tears in her eyes at the start of the air battle, so it wasn't only because she bit herself. Hajime as well, because Aiko doesn't particularly have high physical strength. In order to avoid using intense movements he used light speed. Remember, he uses it to slow down time and accelerate his thinking process. He knocked down the oncoming barrage and dodged with minimum movements, however the movements were still more intense than a roller coaster. Aiko was already in a groggy state, however he couldn't just go ahead and toss her away either. Nointo's merciless attack gave no room for Hajime, who was holding Aiko, to do that, plus as soon as he threw her, the attacks would likely be aimed at Aiko. Fighting with Aiko behind him could work, however moving together while holding her would be the better choice. Besides, this situation won't be continuing forever. A reliable companion should be coming to their rescue soon. Hajime used Schlog to shoot down the silver feathers which surrounded them from all directions while evading. Hajime spoke to Aiko, who had shut her eyes tightly and was clinging tightly onto him. Sensei, hold on for just a bit longer. Right now my companion is heading here. When that fellow gets here, you'll be able to get to the ground. All right. But, what about you? Of course, I'm gonna kill that arrogant person. I'm sorry for holding you back. While grinding her teeth, she was aware that she was literally extra baggage. Hajime embraced Aiko closely and performed a somersault. In the inverted world, the silver bombardment passed over Hajime's head. The flash of light erased the upper part of the isolation tower which Aiko had previously been held captive again. A shriek was let out, however it was drowned out by the shock waves. While pressed onto Hajime's chest, his heartbeat could be heard and wasn't erratic at all. Aiko understood and obtained a strange sense of security from hearing it. Really, what am I thinking about in this situation? She rebutted herself, however she gave in and clung onto Hajime with even more strength. Don't worry about it. I've expected an unreasonable situation since the beginning. Wah, you'd go that far, just for me? Of course, Hajime meant that in the sense of colliding against the Church for the Age of God's magic, not in the sense of helping Aiko. Just that, Aiko, who was drunk from the situation, splendidly misunderstood its meaning. And, in a situation where she was being embraced and protected, further increased her misunderstanding. It's necessary that she wake up quickly. So you still have room to talk, irregular. Nuguo? Immediately after the exchange of silver bombardments and barrage of silver feathers, a mechanically cold voice sounded out within striking distance of Hajime's side. At once, he used his artificial arm to shoot out behind himself from the elbow. He also used the recoil to turn himself around. What jumped into his eyes was, one large sword used to defend the attack, and the other large sword was swung sideways. The large sword was 2 meters in length, 30 centimeters in width, and cladded in silver light. Just being there was enough to make you feel a sense of overwhelming intimidation being released from it. And, its ability that it bears is also quite merciless. After all, it was clad in the silver inherent magic decomposition that Nointo used. It would be against the rules to even touch it, however. Even if he knew that, he couldn't perform any unreasonable movements because Aiko was still there. Hajime immediately used Schlog to hit the center of the large sword to divert its trajectory and allowed himself to fall backwards. With that he just barely managed to dodge it. The large sword passed by and grazed his bangs, which caused him to break out in cold sweat. He instantaneously used his artificial arm, Schlag, and Vajra. The Azanthian managed to hold off against the decomposition, but it's inevitable that it would take damage every time they came into contact. This time around, Skelg's surface was scraped down slightly. If the same thing is done over and over again, it'll probably be destroyed quite fast. Nointo didn't stop the centrifugal force caused by the large sword. While rotating, the moonlight was reflected and caused her silver hair to glitter beautifully. She then turned to Hajime and brought down her sword that she used to block the bullets. With immense power, the speed of the sword already far exceeded the common sense of its large frame. Once again, Hajime shot out a shell from his artificial arm to fend off the large sword and used its recoil to rotate. He then pointed Schlag's muzzle at Nointo and pulled the trigger 3 times. 3 flashes of light roared out as they headed towards Nointo's heart. He accurately shot them towards her abdomen. However, Nointo's reaction speed wasn't normal either. She had already held up her large sword to protect her stomach the moment Hajime aimed his gun. Hajime then used the crossbits to pursue Nointo, who was distanced due to the power of the railguns. The loaded exploding slug bullets gave out a wave of bright red ripples in the night sky, and it created a terrifying shockwave. Although Nointo managed to easily negate it with her silver wings, just as Hajime planned it out, they were distanced from one another. Hawawa. What? How did, sensei? I'm begging you, while we're still trying to kill each other, please don't release such cute sounds. It's like it'll ruin the mood. See, cute. Nagumo-kun. What are you saying to your sensei? They were in a super high-grade battle where victory or defeat could be settled in the matter of seconds. However, Aiko's cute screams would be heard in intervals. Hajime's vigor was being cut down each time. You're surprisingly comfortable while being protected? I think? Was said while looking at them suspiciously. Actually, half of that was correct. Aiko had never thought in her wildest dreams that she would feel so secure while being embraced by Hajime, even while holding extra baggage, in order to overpower you. As expected, you are too strong. You're not a suitable piece for my masters. Well, I'm glad. Finally aggravating the neats, being called an unneeded nuisance and unqualified pieces of the highest evaluation. Thanks a lot. It's useless if you're trying to make me angry. I have no emotions. Huh? What are you saying? Those were obviously my real feelings. Nointo expanded her wings and steeled her eyes, then posed her twin swords in a cross. As she said, there really were no feelings. Was it just a useless conversation then? In Hajime's eyes, some anger began to swell up. His useless thoughts were then emitted immediately. Anyhow, he'll still kill her. No matter what he thinks of Nointo, in the end it's a trivial thing. Nointo's silver wings began to flutter again. The silver feathers were released and scattered in the sky. However, this time it wasn't shot at Hajime. Instead, they gathered around Nointo in an instant. Several silver feathers were piled up on top and overlapping each other. Right, it was a magic formation. The magic formation glowed out silver lights, and Nointo glared at Hajime and disastrous flame wave, I think? The magic that was used created a huge tsunami of fire that scorched up the sky. It appears that she was able to not only use magic bullets, but also attribute magic. Though she's never used it up till now, it was because she judged that silver magic bullets would be enough. In other words, she's become serious. The huge wave of flames raised up and down and completely towered over their heads. Towards the extraordinary waves of flames, Aiko momentarily sees an illusion that the world was engulfed in great flames. She glanced up at Hajime from his chest. He was searching desperately for something, and sweat could be seen on his cheeks. What Hajime was looking for was the core of the magic. If he can find it with his magic eye, he can make the whole thing disappear as long as he shoots through it. Of course, it would take godlike pinpoint accuracy to shoot through a needle-like hole, but for Hajime it was already a normal skill. However, the magic that Nointo used was a super wide-ranged magic. It was large enough to completely illuminate Kamiyama, which could be comparable to daytime. It was like searching for a needle in an ocean. The position of the core was unknown, and the time limit ended without mercy. The tsunami of flames that reached several hundred meters completely swallowed Hajime and Aiko without letting them escape. It was checkmate no matter how anyone looks at it. It would be normal to assume that the two people were completely burnt down and left no traces at all. However, Nointo didn't look away from the center of the great flames that burned brightly. Will you also surpass this? Immediately after Nointo muttered that, the attack's effects ended. At the center of the great flames, Hajime and Aiko were flawlessly enclosed by 4 crossbits with Hajime and Aiko at the center. The 4 cross bits created a triangular pyramid and connected with one another through wires. A film of bright red light stretched in between the field where the wires connected. It's still only in its experimental stage, but it seems to have worked quite well. This is. Hajime's slightly relieved expression could be seen. This was possible because the wire and ores which carried space magic through generation magic were built into the cross bits. When 4 points were united, a box-type barrier would be formed. It's not just a simple barrier though, it's the type that shuts out space itself. Theoretically, its defensive powers were guaranteed. However, it was still in the experimental stages, because there was no solid proof on how much it could actually endure. Hajime was slightly uneasy for a moment. Nointo looked at the barrier in amazement and saw Aiko, who was still embraced, being restless. Once again she formed another magic formation, but there were more than 20 magic formations this time. Their forms unfolded as silver feathers were shot towards Hajime simultaneously. It was exactly like an attack of angry waves. Most likely, although the 4-point barrier might demonstrate considerable strength, it would be a problem for those inside of it to be caged in. Moreover, it's uncertain if it could endure Nointo's waves of all-out attacks. The bad side of this barrier was that Hajime could not attack while enclosed because space itself is cut off. Therefore, Hajime quickly released the barrier and distanced himself greatly away from Nointo. He tried to devote himself to evading until Tio arrived. Then suddenly at that time, a song began to resound throughout Kamiyama. Hajime looked at where the singing was coming from as he dodged the silver feathers. There, he saw a gathering of church priests. Their hands were crossed in a prayer pose and they continued singing. The chorus consisted of 100 priests, gave out a solemnity feel to it, just like those that you'd be able to see at Earth. Just what? Immediately after, Hajime questioned himself. What's this? My body is Nagumo-kun? Oh what is this? Hajime and Aiko's bodies felt weird. Strength couldn't be found in their bodies and their magic powers were quickly diminishing. It was as if all their energy were being sapped out of their bodies. Moreover, particles of light began to cling on them and their movements became more obstructed. A magic that causes an abnormal state. As expected of the head temple. Their measures against enemies are perfect. Hajime's guess was right on target. Ishtar and them noticed that Nointo, God's true apostle, was fighting and supported her with the hymn of supreme degeneration. I think? Magic. This was a brutal magic which weakened the enemies and restrains them as well. It was an irregular magic which could only be sustained if continuously sang by multiple priests at once. Ishtar, he seems to understand his duties well. Quite a good piece. Ishtar was looking at Nointo with an ecstatic expression from the ground, and Nointo looked back at him with eyes that showed no feelings. If you looked at Ishtar's expression, you'd know right away that he wished to cooperate with Nointo, and it seemed to also be the height of his lifetime. Certainly, it was a convenient existence that moved along with God's will. Ishtar and the other priests aside, currently, the magic invoked was definitely a troublesome one. Hajime gradually lost his powers. While supplementing it with his huge magical powers, he managed to dodge Nointo's attack. However, it was obvious that his reaction time was cut down drastically. And while continuing on with that body state, Nointo's attacks weren't letting up at all. Several magic formations formed around Nointo and lightning bolts came dashing out. It rushed towards Hajime while drawing irregular movements in the sky. Hajime shot through the lightning bolt's core with Schlag and they dispersed. However, he couldn't get rid of the electrified air caused by the lightning bolts and they got shocked. A little momentary stiffness. However, that was a fatal chance against Nointo. Nointo moved in at super speeds and crossed her twin swords together. Due to the momentary stiffness from the electric shock, Hajime's reaction was slightly delayed. He somehow managed to divert a blow away using Schlag, but the second blade couldn't be avoided and it sank into his shoulder. Guyu. While raising a painful voice, he flipped his body by using the outburst from his artificial arm. While using aerodynamic, he desperately attempted to get outside of Nointo's sword range. Naturally, her severe sword attacks didn't allow him to have that much free time. He made the crossbit self-destruct and managed to distance himself away from her. Nagumo-kun. I'm alright, so be quiet. Blood dripped down from Hajime's shoulder and onto Aiko's cheeks. From the shockwave that the crossbits created, Vajra was used to defend themselves. Although Aiko didn't get hit much by the impact, she desperately tried to keep her consciousness and raised a worried scream towards Hajime, but Hajime no longer had time to worry about Aiko. While replying coldly, Nointo began to shoot out silver feathers. Hajime used Vajra, Air Claw, and Schlag to bring them down. Because of the particles of light, his body felt sluggish. It wasn't possible to evade everything after all. Towards that kind of Hajime, Nointo charged forwards from the front. Was a feint and spread her silver wings. A light was emitted. The bright lights blinded Hajime's sights. However, Hajime's perception ability was first class. Immediately, he felt Nointo's presence behind him and turned Schlag around and rapidly fired. Consecutive explosions were heard. Turning around, he saw a bundle of silver feathers scattering around. Right, it was a decoy that Nointo made with a bundle of her silver feathers. Hajime's spine stood up straight. His instincts were ringing out loudly, warning him. Hajime regretted that he had turned around. He could only pull the trigger without properly aiming with his arm backwards. Bullets were shot, and luckily enough it flew towards Nointo's head, but she easily evaded by ducking her head. And one of the large swords cut down onto Hajime's back. Hajime used the derivation of Vajra, which was intensive strengthening, I think. To the best of his abilities, he steeled himself in preparation. Although Nointo's large sword was equal to Hajime's Vajra for an instant, the wall was immediately torn apart. The sword's tip swung down onto Hajime's body. Ga-a. Datnagumokun. He felt pain burning on his back. Towards Hajime, who instinctively leaked out his voice, Aiko's expression and voice were impatient. However, Hajime countered Nointo by somersaulting forwards from using the impact of the cut. Nointo immediately pursues them with her sword held high. Hajime, whose body was sluggish, placed Vajra onto a crossbit to make it into a shield. Other crossbits were sent to the left and right of Nointo and released their built-in exploding bullets as Nointo rushes in. She used her silver wings to brush off the bullets from the crossbits, and used her large sword to cut down the crossbit, acting as Hajime's shield. Furthermore, she flung her second sword onto the first one in order to devour the crossbit. It easily cut through. Hajime's eyes were open wide. Nointo's eyes were literally right in front of his. Her eyes showed clearly that this was their difference. In other words, this is the end. Hajime's eyes showed no sign of giving up. However, in order to not let Aiko die in this situation, he needed to consider things. If it comes to it, Hajime decided that he would get hurt instead. In such cases, if he became too weakened, he'd have to regrettably use limit breakthrough without waiting for Tio to arrive. He prepared himself to sacrifice his left arm first and, against Nointo's large sword, Hajime's held-up artificial left arm was torn in two, the moment when it was about to break through and deal a fatal injury. Guga-a. Dat along with the dragon's roar, a black flash approached from beneath them with terrific power. It was a scorching breath which eliminates everything. The violent black storm was accurately aimed at Nointo. Immediately, Nointo's silver wings wrapped around her body in a defensive stance. Just after that, the black breath directly hit Nointo's wings. Although it was being decomposed, the force of the blow pushed her away. The black and silver magics collide with one another and caused black-silver magical powers to scatter in the air. Nointo was flung backwards into one of the church's towers. With the sound of the impact, the tower began rattling and crumbled down. The screams of the priests led by Ishtar could be heard from underneath. They seemed to be upset because an apostle of God was blown off. Hajime took out Orkan, his rocket launcher, from the treasure warehouse, and without looking he shot all 12 rockets towards Ishtar's group. This time around he ignored the different kind of screams being heard. Because another voice echoed and drowned out theirs. Master, are you alright? Towards the voice, Hajime's cheeks loosen up, although he's still on the lookout for Nointo. The arrival of the dragon that he was waiting for came. You saved me, Tio. It was a bit dangerous just then. While happy because of Hajime's words, the black dragon, which was Tio, was seen regaining steepness after bringing down the powerful enemy and came beside Hajime while fluttering her wings. I'm glad above all else that I made it on time. Later chastise. I want a reward. I'll think about it if you manage to protect Sensei. Really? Don't go forgetting those words now. Sensei Dono, you should get on mistress's back. Hajime, in such a situation Tio is still faithful to her own desires. In retrospect, Yue, Shia, and Kaori are too, but, with an amazed expression, Aiko, who was embraced closely, was put on her back. Aiko somehow felt an odd sensation from the two's conversation. She clung obediently on Tio's back because now she won't be weighing him down any longer. Edo, Tio-san. My best regards. Amu. Leave it to me. After all, Sensei is an important person to master. In the sense of a teacher, I won't let you fall into enemy hands. Aiko further increased her misunderstanding from the words important person that Tio said, and anxiously looked at Hajime. However you looked at it, it wasn't the expression of anxiety that a teacher has towards a student, it was the air of a lady in love. However, there wasn't anyone there to Tsukume, and at that time, The tower which Nointo plunged into blew off from the ground with a roaring sound. A thick cloud of dust danced around, and from the wind pressure of Nointo's silver wings, it was all blown away and showed her unhurt form. Tio's breath didn't seem to be able to pierce through the silver wings' defenses. Tio, go. However, I'll come back to help after Sensei Dono's safety is secured. At the very least, Mistress will do something about the people of the church. Towards Hajime, who was already staring at Nointo with intense bloodthirst, Tio managed to guess a while ago the cause of the magic which was weakening Hajime, she reliably declared while staring at Ishtar's group. Hajime continued to focus on Nointo when those words were heard. Hajime simply nodded once and then charged fiercely towards Nointo through the air. Nagumo-kun. Be careful. Please. Fumu? Ho-oh, well. Towards Aiko, who was posed with both hands united in front of her chest praying, Tio seemed to have guessed what was going on and became interested. In other words, she let out a, "This is going to be interesting," voice. Sensei Dono. Though I understand you're worried about Master, I'm in a bit of a rush. I'll send you onto the ground, then Mistress will beat around the old damaged group over there. It wouldn't do for Master to be obstructed after all. Aiko said, "Wait," as Tio began to turn around. For what though? Tio glanced at Aiko, who was on her back by bending her neck. Aiko returned the glance with a determined look. "Tio-san. If you put me down on the ground now, wouldn't having to come back after dropping me off take up quite a bit of time? This is 8,000 meters in the sky. Going back and forth should be quite harsh." Mew? "Certainly, that's absolutely right, but, Sensei Dono, you can't be thinking to." "Yes. If Tio-san intends to fight for Nagumo-kun's sake, then, please allow me to help. If you don't immediately do something about Ishtar-san's group, Nagumo-kun would quickly weaken. It would be a waste of time to send me back down onto the ground." What Aiko says is possible, however honestly Tio is reluctant. Although a lot of people seem to have been injured by the Orkan's attack, if you looked, Ishtar is preparing to sing the hymn again while also constructing a barrier. Tio wanted to blow them all away as well. But, if by chance Aiko gets hurt, the promise with Hajime would disappear. But, it may be bad of me to say this to Sensei Dono, but what can you do? Without magic formations nor battle experience? Can you fight against the priests and their knights? Tio's opinion was severe, which caused Aiko to strongly grit her teeth, and then she slowly moved her finger towards her mouth. And with her eyes closed, she bit and made a cut on her finger. The blood that dripped from her fingertip was used to draw magic formations by smearing it onto the back of her opposite hand. I may not look like it, but in terms of magical powers I'm equal to Amanogawa-kun, who is the hero. Though I don't have any battle experience, I'll show you that I can properly assist you. Fighting against another person. Honestly, I'm scared, but I have no other choice but to do it. From now on, in order for everyone to survive and return to Japan, more than anyone else, I must not run away." The kingdom that was skeptical to invasion, even the king had become a fanatic like the priests. Relying on God, who planned out everything in the first place, is no longer an option. In order to survive in this world now, Aiko and them must continue advancing ahead. If that's so, as the teacher, even if she was avoided for it, what must be done, must be done. Tio understood from the determination in Aiko's eyes. Though she still hesitated, she decided to permit Aiko tagging along because there was no other way. It's inevitable if you've already made your final decision. If it's Sensei Dono's will, then Master wouldn't have any complaints. As you wish. Shall we blow up those fools together? Yes. Aiko's tension and fear, and the answer which made up the decision that signaled their movements appeared. Tio flew towards the great church which symbolized the priests in a quick dash. Their enemies were the priests and temple knights, which were made up of hundreds of people. Now, a different tag team named Tio and Aiko challenged this world's largest religious head temple.